What's happening, everybody? Thank you for coming back to All Access Live with Kevin Rankin. Before I get started with my awesome guest today, let me thank my sponsors. Five Star Guitars is based in Beaverton, Oregon. If you are away from that area, you might not realize that if you order online through Oregon, there's no sales tax. So people that are needing to play guitar and be pro musicians like my guest today, go to fivestarguitars.com/allaccesslive, enter the promo code of allaccess15. And aside from saving from no sales tax, you're going to save 15% off everything else you see there. So let them know that I sent you. Go to fivestarguitars.com/allaccesslive, and you'll be on your way to becoming a rock star like my next guest, who happens to be coming to us all the way from his sleepy little town in the United Kingdom. But before I bring him on camera, let me show you a little bit about one of his new endeavors. My buddy Rob Lane right here has this crazy new video store. Remember videos back in the 80s when you would go and even rent VCRs to go and watch videotapes? Well, he's got a collection of everything 80s in the shop, and why don't we take you to take a little look at the 80s video store. Look at that. Oh my goodness, man. What a cool shop that is. Rob Lane, how are you, buddy?
I'm great, Kevin. I'm great. Thank you for having me, mate. I'm stoked. I'm stoked to be here.
You know what? Before I even brought you on camera and I did my introduction, I want people to know the biggest reason I need you to be here is because you're not only one of my favorite podcasters, but I think you're the best at doing it. I really
Get out of here.
Man, you've got such a gift for this thing. Your quality. So that I'm guilty. I guess I'm a little biased because the guests that you bring on are from an era and a genre that I love a lot. You know, some of the guests you've had are buddies of mine, and some of them are my heroes, right? So not only are the guests great, but you're really fantastic about vetting them, getting information as a backdrop. But your editing is phenomenal, man. You really
It's all there. It's all in the editing, mate. It's
well,
all in the editing.
but you've got a good ear for that. So let's talk a tiny bit about that ahead of time. For people that don't know, stvpod.com is where you can find straight to video podcasts that you've been doing for a couple years now, right?
Yes, I think it's 2.5 years now. I think it is, which it's gone so fast. It's
It
crazy.
has. I think you and I have started about the same time, and so we can talk a little bit about why you put that together. But if they go to STV Pod, they'll find a ton of different content. I know that you've got some videos that you put out there on your web pages as well that show a little behind the scenes of your capture. But the edits, your stuff is so concise, so clear. You just get the nuts and the nuts and bolts, the good stuff, all the there's no fat. You know, you've trimmed away the fat. So how do you edit something like that together, man? Do you constantly have notes where you're actually just cutting out gaps, or what do you do in your editing process that gets it so clean?
I don't know. I think it's with time and stuff like that. And as people will realize with me talking to you, they'll realize how much I stumble. And then they'll listen to a podcast like, you didn't sound like that on Kevin's podcast. It was all over the place. I don't know. I think you just kind of get used to certain things and how people, the flow of the chat, and try and take out as much space as possible. It's a real compliment, though, when people say, the editing is so good, I didn't realize it was an edit. It still flows nice and well. So that's the biggest compliment. I appreciate you saying it as well.
I only know it's an edit because, like you, I stumble all the time. If I go back
Yeah.
and analyze how many times I say then yes, the ums and the ahs are just excessive, and you're great about not only trimming those things away, but it just does flow. It's seamless, and I'm thinking about some of the guests that I've had that have been really difficult. If I had the opportunity to go back and edit and take out all the pregnant pauses where behind the scenes I thought, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm pulling teeth trying to get a conversation out of this person, you know? But I don't hear that in your stuff at all. All of your guests sound like they are excited and they're happy to be there. I'm sure most of them are, but you know,
Yeah.
we get guests at different hours of the day too. Like, so it's late in the evening for you right now in the UK. What part of
It's all good.
the country are you in?
Um, I always say, which you'll probably hear on my podcast. Normally, people say, "Oh, where are you from?" I always say the nearest big city is Nottingham.
Right.
So right in the middle, which has always been a benefit for being in a band as well. Because with the UK, you could probably fit the UK 2 or 3 times into most US states.
Right.
It's that size. So being in a band, being right in the middle, I could do a day job, then drive to a gig within a couple of hours. So for me, that worked out so well for many, many years when I was really pushing the band stuff. I
Yeah.
could work the day job still and hold it down, then drive straight to a show, do the show, come back, get up for work the next day, then do it all again the next day.
Well, tell me about the day jobs, man. Tell me about your past. What have you done?
um, I'm pretty what's the word? Loyal might be one word, or I like staying in one thing for a long time. But I was working at a printing company for like over 20 years up until November 2020. So I was doing that for 21 years, I think it was.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah. Which again worked out great for the band because it was free printing, free posters.
I was gonna say because you've got a lot of killer print material too, and for people that don't know, Rob's an unbelievable graphic designer. The amount of detail that you put into the designs of your logo and your packaging for each of the episodes is phenomenal. But I look at the backdrop even in the video store and the other things you've done, the '80s, the arcade frames and stuff, all of that graphic design. You've got a killer eye for this. So we're at a print shop. I'm sure that helped too, huh?
It did, yeah. It was great, but I have to say some of the work I do myself. But then some of the stuff with the straight to video artwork that's done by a friend of mine called Daz, who's an incredible graphic designer.
Really?
He came up with the straight to video logo and the podcast artwork, which you see each week with the video
Yeah.
casing. He came up with all that for me. I gave him the idea, then he, like within a couple of days, he came back. He says, "Will this be all right, mate?" I'm like,
Um,
"Dude, knocked it out the park."
it really is. Do you have showcase of that stuff at stvpod.com? I
There's
think each
not
episode.
the yeah. Each episode has its own artwork, and I just drop each guest in there each time. So I need to get you on again in that new format because you was on one of the original formats, which I did.
Well, and I was honored to be on, and I'm not even sure how you found me, to be honest with you. But after we did the interview together, and I was really impressed with not only the conversation that we had. You knew a lot more about me than I think I even know about myself, which is really scary. But when you listen to the other episodes, it's unbelievable how much detail you gather for each guest. For my show, oftentimes, as you know, it's conversational, right? So
Yeah.
it's more about getting to know somebody without knowing a lot about their background. Most of my guests started out where we were buddies, we were touring
Mhm.
together. But as it went on, I found that I wanted to find visionaries or people that I was fascinated by. In your show, one of the most recent ones that I've listened to a bunch, the Johnny Gioeli. I was such a huge Hardline fan, and I actually texted Todd Jensen last night when we knew that we were going to do this episode because I've known Todd for a long time. He's a Portlander,
Yeah.
and like you, that Double Eclipse Hardline album changed my life, man. I think it's in my top 10 of all time records.
Yeah.
Some of the greatest rock ballads are on there. Hands of Time is one of the most I think it's unfortunate that it hasn't had more recognition because it's an all-star group of musicians too,
Oh,
right? You got Dean Castronovo, another buddy of mine, and Todd Jensen, and of course Johnny and Joey, Gioeli, and
some guy called Neil Sean was kind of
I
in there
think
as well.
wasn't he in a band, Santana? Yeah. Yeah, obviously people know him from Journey, but yeah, Neil Sean assembled this all-star group, and it should have been huge, but it came around right at the end of that sort of hair band rock era and the beginning of grunge. Just
Yeah.
didn't fit with the commercial. But your enthusiasm for those guests, I think, is what really made it for me. So let's talk about the formation of the show, what you had in mind for your straight to video podcast, and kind of how you come about finding your guests and how you vet them.
Right. Well, the podcast, like yours, started during lockdown. I think most of the worldwide population started a podcast during
It's,
lockdown. I don't know how many of us have survived, but me and you are still here doing it, and quite a few others. So we kind of weathered the storm on that one, and I'm so glad that I started it because it's given me a great outlet. I used to back in, when was it? The late 90s. I did the old fanzine format, the old printed magazine. And the very first one I did was one called Soundcheck, which was it was like a local fanzine showcasing all local unsigned bands and stuff like that. And that was great. That kind of got me into interviewing bands, just going to the rehearsal rooms and before gigs at Soundcheck with my little tape recorder, recording
Yeah.
the interviews and stuff like that. And then a few years later, as I was getting more and more into music and gigging quite a lot and even supporting some of my favorite bands, I started another one called Trash Pit Magazine. And that was around, I think it was 2002. Again, a printed format magazine. But that was kind of giving me the opportunity to, like, I don't know what any of my favorite bands are doing. No one's doing articles on Danger Danger. No one's doing
Right.
articles on Trickster anymore. I'm
Right.
going to find out myself. So the first person I emailed was Steve Brown from Trickster when he
Nice.
was doing the 40-foot Ringo stuff.
Yeah.
And he emailed me back. I was like, holy crap, Steve
Yeah.
Brown's emailed me back. It was like a big deal for me. And it still is now, anything like that. And so Trash Pit allowed me to give coverage to bands which I loved and also bands which I was finding around the time. Because even though that kind of music wasn't that popular, there was still some really cool bands coming out, like Robin Black and the Intergalactic Rock Stars from Canada. I don't know if you ever heard of them
I
before.
haven't.
Uh, and
Sorry, Canada.
yeah, and a band called Crash Kelly, another Canadian
Oh yeah.
band, which
Yeah.
is Sean Kelly, who went on to play for Nelly Furtado. He now plays in Lee Aaron's band, great guitar player. So that was an outlet for me to interview bands and kind of get my chops up again with interviewing. And then music took over in a big way for me, playing live and in bands. So Trash Pit went by the wayside. And then when lockdown hit, I realized how much I was missing. Well, for many people, interacting with people.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that podcast allowed me to do it all again, but in a different format, a different media, and not stop since.
So, taking the time from Trash Pit, did you go back to the guests that you interviewed then and say, "Hey, I've got a new format completely. Let's do this, in a streaming format that I can get it everywhere."
Exactly that. My first interview with Trash Pit was Steve Brown. So episode 1 of Straight to Video podcast with Steve Brown. It only felt appropriate to do
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
uh,
And okay, so during that time too, because I think about both of the magazines, the publications you had, were you playing actively, doing some gigs on the side as well then?
Yeah, definitely, especially
Okay.
around the Trash Pit time. That was kind of when everything happened all at once for me and things started to get really busy. Just as Trash Pit was released within like the same year, I'd been pretty busy with a few bands and some friends, a band called Dip, just DIP, which was a really fun band, which we had was touring all over the UK at times. But then I formed a band with a friend of mine, Rob Wild. We were in a band called Teenage Casket Company, which
Right.
is the most bizarre name ever, but Chips Enough thinks it's the best band name he's ever heard. So I'll
Nice.
take that.
Absolutely. And two Robs, you know.
Yeah, that's where it got really confusing. That's when I had to, because we both had kind of the same haircut, like the blonde
The
John
Bob.
Lesnick Goo
The
Goo Dolls kind of thing.
yeah.
Um, and it got really confusing. So that's when I went back to my old school nickname of Laney to try and separate the two of us. But it still happens even now. People get us confused. It's ever so
Dude.
strange.
Oh yeah. Well, you can always blame the other person for anything you did wrong, right? So
I think he does that a lot.
playing in bands and getting to do the interviews, I'm sure helped, right? Because one of my favorite stories when you talked to Johnny Joeli about seeing Hardline back in the day and getting a chance to talk to Todd Jensen, if because you and I both know, man, backstage behind the door of the venues, there are people that hang out and they don't have a sense of that comfort zone where you need to let an artist get a little breathing room, right? So they'll if they get you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, right? So if they give my memory of what you said about Todd is that he came outside in the cold and talked to you guys for like 15 minutes, right? You were freezing. It's a beautiful testament to his kindness and generosity. And as a young, rocker like yourself, those moments stay with you for the rest of your life. They
To this
change.
day, man. I'm talking about it 30 years later.
Yeah, well, it formed who you became, right?
Yeah.
And probably even how you treat other people as a musician. I'm sure then you were able to turn that kind of experience out when you're out touring with bands like Bullet Boys and you're actually seeing fans out there. I'm sure you gave them a little more time because of the experience you had with Todd, realizing what it meant to you.
I hope so. Yeah, it's something I've always took with me, and I say you just know how much that means to people.
Yeah,
It's a big deal. Really is a big deal for something that's so easy for you to do. It's not hard work.
right.
Being nice to someone and giving somebody some of your time, and yeah, it just makes such a difference. So yeah, hopefully, I've always carried that on in any opportunity that I've had to. If anyone's been wanting to speak to me, hopefully I've carried that on and gave it back and put it back out there.
You know what? I'm glad to hear you say that, and I'm going to take that soundbite. I'm going to put it out there for people to remember because it's really not that hard. No matter what kind of personality you have, it should be pretty easy to be kind to people, right? But here's another thing that I've just noticed in talking to you, because I'm used to hearing your voice so much, but
Right.
you too are a smiler all the time. Laney's a smiler, man. This guy's got a smile all the time, and I love that that comes across in your interviews. You can hear your smile in your communication, which is, I think, it's a very charismatic thing. Uh, as far as those days, again, I talked a little bit about your time with Bullet Boys. You got in accordance with your interviews, you've also got a long, lengthy sort of pedigree of bands that you've played with. So those early bands, you talked about Dip and you talked about like Teenage Casket Company. Well, some of the bands that you sent me that I had no idea. We talked Bullet Boys. I've had a half dozen buddies play bass for Bullet Boys at some point too.
Yeah,
It's
I
so
think I'm Bullet Boy 38, maybe something like that.
I, I have to say the same thing with a flock of seagulls for me, right? I think I'm drummer number 11, so, but, the, these gigs, cause most of the bands that I've seen, those bands, I mean, obviously Bullet Boys is an LA band, right? So how did you get a gig like that? Cause I know you're a big fan of the era.
Yeah,
How did that gig show up for you?
exactly that. Being a fan, I used to when I was kind of old enough to see all these gigs. A lot of time the heyday of it had gone. I was like, damn, I missed them when they played in the main room and all this kind of stuff. But these bands constantly came to the UK. Hats off to them. So when I really deep dived into it, Pretty Boy Floyd was still coming to the UK.
Yeah.
Enough's Enough were regularly coming to the UK. Bang Tango, I could just reel all of them off. And they always used to play Nottingham Rock City, whether it be the big room, the small room, or something like that. And it got to one point, it must have been around, let me think, early 2000s when I was doing Trash Pit. And these bands had come over, and sometimes it'd be a 3-tier bill with Pretty Boy Floyd and Bang Tango and somebody else or whatever. And I noticed that it was just the lead singer, but with the same backing band for
Oh
each
yeah.
band, which was cool because they always had cool guys come over. Like Michael Thomas was coming over playing guitar, who's a great guy and he's a good
Yeah.
friend of mine. But he'd end up like doing 2 sets in the night. He'd do one set, go off stage, put different stage gear on, come back on, and Steve Sex Summers had come on singing after Joe Lestay from Bang Tango had played or something like that. So I thought, this is cool, but I'd like to see a different band with them each time. So
Sure.
all I did cheekily was email the booking agent in Hollywood and said, "Look, if you're ever in need of a bass player, give me a shout."
Yeah.
I heard nothing back, no reply, no thank you or anything. It was worth a shot. Then about 2 months later, I got an email. How do you feel about playing bass for Bullet Boys on a 2-week UK European tour with Enough's with Enough's Enough and Faster Pussycat?
Oh my God, man! Like that's like
They
saying,
didn't know me.
how would you like to have a winning lottery ticket handed to you, right? So in your mind, you just hit the gold lottery, right?
Yeah. And that was it. Okay, yeah, I'll do that. This is where I need to be on this date. I
Re-
had, I don't
rehearsals?
think I had, no
Nothing.
rehearsals. I don't think I had any. I'm trying to think. I don't think I had any communication with Mark prior to it. The only person I had communication with was uh, the booking agent and Sean, who was playing guitar for them at the time. He sent me the set list, and that was it.
Oh,
And I met them at the airport, got on the bus, went to the gig. We sound checked 2 songs, and it was away you go.
God, that's awesome. So Smooth Up for sure. For the Love of Money, is that the other soundcheck tune?
What did we do? We did, I think we did Riff Raff by
Oh,
AC/DC because that's
nice.
what we was opening with at the time.
Oh, sweet.
And maybe Hard as a Rock, which was the
Okay.
second song in the set, and that was it.
Nice. Oh my God.
Fingers crossed I'd learned all the rest of the set okay.
Yeah, okay. And you had a set list, so you knew the order. You could kind of just run that stuff on your own. For
Yeah, yeah.
for people that don't know, if you're not a musician and you get an opportunity like this, if you don't just wear out these songs to be, like, so you're so sick of them. If you show up unprepared for a gig like that, there's no way you're ever getting that phone call again because the industry's so small. The fact that you called the booking agent and people like, Mark Torian, man, like he's in a circle of people that the influence is out there, especially too if you're doing Bulletboys and other gigs. If those guys see, oh yeah, bass player showed up, he only knew 2 of the songs, didn't have the stuff prepared, you're probably not getting another opportunity like that.
Yeah.
So obviously, you had your stuff together, you did the tour. What were your favorite memories from the road that stint?
I'm sure you'll agree, and it's what I say to this day about the best thing about being in a band is the people you meet,
Yeah,
whether it be playing on a tour or meeting people like yourself through podcasts and all that kind of thing. Those are the things which I continually take away and hold close to my heart. And the friends I met on that tour are still friends with me today. I met Todd Cairns, who
oh yeah,
now plays in
Slash,
Slash's band. That
yeah,
was his, I think that might have been Todd's first trip to the UK.
really, okay,
Yeah. He was playing in Faster Pussycat at the time. All the Faster Pussycat dudes were awesome. Uh, when I went to the airport to meet the band, first person I met was Chips Enough,
oh
who I'd
nice,
met a few times before, and he kind of recognized me, but he was the first person who I saw immediately at the airport. You can't miss Chips Enough.
no
He's
you can't,
6 foot whatever, rock star,
yeah,
24/7. So yeah, just the friends I made playing all over the UK is great, but just the chance to go to Europe
mm,
and the way people the way that you get looked after in Europe is amazing.
yeah,
I've got some wonderful friends in Italy who I miss dearly, who I'd love to see again, who we got to know on that tour. Norway was incredible,
oh
just
wow,
seeing all these places and just kind of surreal to be in that situation. It was literally on a plane every other day, and
yeah.
I'd never been in that situation before. I'm sure you've done it on these European legs and stuff like that, but for me, it was like super cool. Me sat next to Johnny Monaco all the time, him cracking jokes constantly.
Oh yeah. Okay. So let's talk Monaco. All right. Aside from that experience, you'd been doing some touring with Johnny Monaco. Uh, Johnny, of course, people that don't know, Johnny fronted the band Enough's Enough for like 15 years, something like that. Uh, Nailed the sound. I mean, really, he had Donnie V's voice. He nailed that sound. He's also one of the most ridiculously talented guitarists I've ever seen. Aside from his talent musically, he is as good crazy as you could possibly have, right? He's insane. And when you tell him that, he gets offended. He thinks there's something wrong with that. But there's no questioning it. He's a nut. And it's a good thing. When you're on the road with him and he's telling these
Yep.
jokes, how many times did you have to do some damage control when he offended somebody?
I don't think, you know what? I don't think he ever offended anybody on that tour. Johnny was a good middleman on that tour
Okay.
because you had like, you had Mark Torian, who again, he's one of my favorite people, but he
Yeah.
is such a larger than life personality, super volatile a lot of the time. So
Yeah.
Monaco in that situation, he almost takes a back seat and just he becomes an observer and just like drops a few nuggets of gold every now and again, which was great to see. But I'd met Johnny maybe a year or two before then. So to be on that tour with him, to really get to know him was brilliant. It was great.
I, you know, One thing that people don't know about Johnny is he's also a really talented magician. So aside from being a musician, he's a talented magician, and I knew that magic was a big part of his early life. And when you guys were out on tour, did he bring any, that in? Did he, like,
I think we got a few card tricks. The
okay.
thing I always seem to remember about that tour was he wore Bruce Lee pajamas for all the tour, I think.
Yeah. Because he's actually, yeah, he's like a fourth degree black belt or something like
Yeah.
that as well. So yeah, he's something else, man. I think with Monaco, I've sort of tried to prepare my friends because he was going to go do a Flock of Seagulls show
Yeah.
about a year ago. We had a show that our guitarist couldn't do it, our backup guitarist couldn't do it, and it was in the Midwest, and we had to go from Sacramento, California. We had to go through, I think we were supposed to go through like Atlanta and then get back to Iowa. So, I know that you're in the UK, but it's basically like going from London to uh, Greece and then over to Belarus. Okay. So, like, it's a completely wrong routing. We had
Right.
to do this for, played Sacramento one night. The next night, we were supposed to play in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So Johnny was going to drive over from Chicago. He had the gig learned. He had a killer silver SG or a silver Flying V guitar that he borrowed for this gig because there's always a silver kind of spacey vibe for a Flock of Seagulls.
Yeah.
He showed up and had everything ready, but our flights didn't align. Our our bass player and our singer, they couldn't make it. I only made it because I carried everything on. I didn't have anything checked and I ran for my connection. So I hung out with Johnny and we all walked around and unfortunately hung out because we didn't get the chance to play the show together. He was so prepared for this gig. He took me back to the hotel and showed me how he learned every single solo note for note for a one-off gig. And I was floored by his talent. I've known him for years, man. And all I have to do is look at him and I start laughing. He doesn't even have to say anything. And you know that he's got a certain look on his face that you'll just, he's going to make you laugh. But there are also times where he would say something to get a laugh out of a random stranger. And maybe their boyfriend looks at you like, I'm going to kill this dude. And maybe he feels protected because he's got his fourth degree black belt. For me,
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know this guy. I don't know who he is, man. But
One of my favorite Monaco stories, which I'll share with you, is when I turned 40 years old, my good friend Michael Richards, who's a drummer who I've played with in various bands, we did a tour with Johnny. When was that? That was 2012. Can't believe that's like 10 years ago now. But we did a tour with Johnny. I had a great time. Me and Mickey went on to play in bands People on Vacation a few years later. And when I turned 40 years old, Mickey surprised me with a trip to Texas.
okay.
Told me we were doing something else, picked me up in the morning on the way down to where we're supposedly going. We're supposed to be doing some filming of a TV show or something like that. He says, "Oh, we've got some parts as extras." That's how he got me
Okay.
on board. And then he dropped it on me. "Oh, we're not doing this TV show. We're going to Texas for the weekend." I'm like, "Dang, really?" He's like, "Oh, it's your 40th birthday." So we flew into Dallas, and as we're coming out to go to the hotel, this homeless guy comes walking up with a trolley, long black hair, shouting, "Hey, hey, hey, hey!" Like, what? It was Johnny Monaco, all dressed up with. He had grills in and everything. It was amazing. I've got a photo. I'll have to send it to you.
Please do. I'll post it in the show notes. Most people might actually think that Johnny truly was homeless at that point, but no. You talked film, and I can't help but notice in your backdrop, I see the Goonies poster there, which is not filmed, of course, in Astoria, Oregon, real close to where I just moved away from. But aside from that, are you a big '80s movie fan as well? Yeah.
100%.
Okay.
Live and breathe it, mate. Live and
That,
breathe it.
which is why '80s Video Store showed
Yeah.
up. Right? So tell me about the formation of that. That's just fantastic that you put this together.
Yeah, I wouldn't. If you'd have told me this 2 years ago that I might have been doing it, I'd like, "Are you crazy?" But yeah, straight to video, the podcast. Prior to that, straight to video was a music project, and now it's become its own brick and mortar video store. So me and my friend Chris and I go back to the late '90s playing in bands. He was a drummer in some bands which we used to play around the local scene with. We've stayed friends. He runs this really cool sports shop in a local town to us. And we got talking early. Where was it? It was in March last year. he said, "Hey, listen, I've got this space above my shop. I want to do something really cool, something retro influenced in there." So I don't know why I immediately thought it, but I said, "Why don't you do a video store? Like, let's recreate one, like a video shop museum." And he was into the idea. I think he must have seen how enthusiastic I was about it. So we set to work on gutting this room, painting it, decorating it, just bringing my entire VHS collection in there. And what we've effectively done is create a video shop museum. There are a few of them all over the world. There's one in California called Slashback Video,
Okay.
which I stole all their ideas.
Nice. Well, I just brought it to the UK. You franchised it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
But there is a couple in the UK, a few little pop-up video stores. But just to see people's reaction when they walk in it is like going in a time warp for a lot of people, because we've tried to make it as authentic as possible. And when they walk in, I was guilty of it. I tell this to everybody who comes into the shop. I was guilty as everybody. Video was massive. It went to DVD. Then all of a sudden, people were buying DVDs. They were much more accessible to buy. Streaming came in and everyone just forgot about it
Right.
for 15, 20 years. But then when you walk into one again, you realize how much time you spent in these places and how much it meant to you. And it all comes flooding back to these people. So hopefully that's the goal. It's not a financial thing, which we're doing. As long as we can cover the costs of the shop, we're more than happy. It's more just to get those reactions to people and just bring it back and share it with younger generations as well. With things like Stranger Things, it's not totally alien to them. They do walk in. Oh, I've seen this on Stranger Things. This is like family video.
Right, exactly. It's amazing to me that generation gets it and they're coming back around. You know, there was a window of time where my boys who are 21 and 23 now, they'd see a phone booth and say, "What is that?" You know, and then I'd have to take them back and see Superman, you know, where he goes and changes it. But now with Stranger Things, you know, all the stuff that sort of happened when we were kids has brought that back to a new normal for them. And it helps for my band. I'm telling you, we have 3 generations of fans that come to a Flock of Seagulls show now. They're 16 and 45 to 65. And because TV, video games, all those kind of things brought, you know, kept it around. But
how music is consumed now, they're consuming it on just face value.
Right.
It's not
true.
It's not on like, oh, this is an old band or this is a new band. They're probably hearing it on a TikTok video.
Right.
And it just sounds great to them. What's this? I'm into this immediately.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's a good point, actually. So the experience when they walk in, what I think of with the small mom and pop video stores when I grew up, they had a distinct smell. It wasn't like they sprayed an air freshener of a, you know, here's the video store air smell. But if it was like a Blockbuster, one of those kind of things, you'd smell the popcorn, right? You'd have a popcorn machine. But there's something about the reels and the boxes of these, you know, the videos as well. There's a smell in there. Even the carpet had a certain smell. So
that must be a thing, because we've had people comment that they're like, "You've nailed the smell." I'm like, "What?"
Right. It's just that's it. It just comes with the tapes, I think.
It must be.
So are you having to do all the stuff that people did back in the day? You're reeling the tapes back up and getting them all rewound to the beginning. You're fixing and, you know, like splicing tape when tapes break, and fixing VCRs. Are you renting all those things and fixing all those?
We're not. No, that is the question that everybody asks when they come in. They say, "Oh, are you actually renting these tapes?" I'm like, "No, it is essentially a video shop museum. It is just for the nostalgia to see it on the shelves and stuff like that." But a lot of people are asking whether that's something down the line but I think we would have to actually rent the old VCRs, like way back in the day when you used to have to rent them for the weekend. But I don't know. I'm not that technical minded, so I don't know if I could put up with people ringing me at like 9:30 in the evening, say it's not working, or I can't get it to work with the TV or something like that. So maybe we'll just keep it as a museum.
I think so. You know, actually the late night calls where I know you guys close at 7. I'm almost there. I got to bring back the VCR at 6:55, and you know, so you don't have to be a babysitter for that.
No.
And are you just kind of actively looking for stuff to add to your museum all the time?
All the time. People have been so generous, mate. It's been crazy. We had like a preview night before we officially opened, and invited some friends of ours who we knew would appreciate it, and we're into this kind of nostalgic thing. And one of the first guys that walked through just walked in with a big shopping bag full of stuff. There you go, full of tapes,
Wow. Oh,
loads of posters. Like the following weekend, a guy came in with like a copy. He said, "I've seen the photos. You don't have a copy of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Here you go."
really?
Dude, thank
Oh,
you.
well, I don't know that I can help that much, but I am coming over for a UK tour in August. And the last time I came over, unfortunately, you had to go see the band without me and an iPad because I was in the hospital with
Yeah,
my back. But I will bring a handful of contributions to your store. I think that'd be really fun to know that it went somewhere besides the storage box in my attic, you know.
that'd be awesome. I'd love for you to see it, mate. It'd be wicked.
Look at our tour dates too, because the shop is not far from Nottingham, right?
Nope.
And you're in the Midlands. I know that we've got a handful of shows coming right through there. And um, as far as gigs go, how much time does this video shop consume of yours? Are you able to actually get out on weekends and play some shows, or?
Right now, we're just opening at weekends. We just do
Okay.
Saturdays and Sundays because it is like a tourist thing. People
Yeah.
working during the week, so footfall during the week. And we're all in a small town. We're not in like Nottingham city centre where
Okay.
there's lots of passing trade. So we just open at the weekends for people. And so far, it's been all right. It's not clashed too much with shows. I did a tour with a band called Grand Theft Audio in September, which meant I was away from the shop for 3 weekends. But we had Chris, who I do this with, which is good because there's two of us doing it, so he can cover when I'm not there. So hopefully we've got a good balance. So if somebody can't make one weekend, the other person can cover it. So
What?
far, so good.
I bet you probably have a bunch of fans of the store now that'd be willing to watch the shop for you while you were off rocking. But
Yeah.
I when I do post the show notes, of course, I'll get the address and the website links in there. I think we had the intro video that had all that information right there too. So um, you've got these labors of love. I think that project had to have been so time consuming. Podcasts, as you and I both know, unless you are Howard Stern or Joe Rogan or somebody out there that are getting huge sponsor dollars, people might not realize the time and the
Mhm.
energy that goes into doing what you do, especially on your end. You're editing and you're producing and marketing this stuff. How do you find the time to actually get your bills paid? And you're a married guy, right? So you're
Yeah.
contributing to the relationship too. So what are you doing in the rest of your time to be able to survive?
I'm treading water at the moment, mate.
Right?
Like I mentioned, I was working at a printing firm for over 20 years. Just before the lockdown, I decided I could cruise out on this till retirement. It's such a lovely company. They've been so great to me over the years when I've been doing bands and need to leave early and all this kind of stuff. They've always been great. But I got to the point where I needed to make a jump and just try something new. And just before the lockdown hit, I handed my notice in. And then I was supposed to leave April 2020, but we all know what happened in March
Right.
2020. So my manager said, "Will you stay on until things get back to normal?" That's fine. I did that. So during that time, it allowed me to get the podcast up and running. And I also do comic conventions, comic cons, selling stuff. That's been a nice income stream. So eventually, when I did get to leave my work in November 2020, I got the podcast. It was secure. Shows were starting to come back for the convention. So right now, I've been saving up for some time, which gave me a bit of a buffer.
Good.
Um, so far it's going all right. I'm still doing printing for people, anyone who needs any design work and all that kind of stuff. I do offer that. So yeah, right now I'm just enjoying the creativity time. It
Yeah.
A lot of the time it doesn't feel like work, but I know I'm putting a lot of time in it. Like say the editing, I was like, am I spending too much time on podcast editing here? But I have a friend who's a professional editor. He does stuff for. Have you heard of the guy Jordan Harbinger? He's one of the big podcast guys, I think.
No.
And my friend is his editor,
Okay.
and he did like this really cool YouTube video which explained his editing process. And it went through it, and he said he spends for 10 minutes of edited audio, he spends about an hour
Mm.
editing it. I was like, that's about the same as what I do. I must be on the right
Yeah,
track.
right.
Woo! I'm not
Yeah.
wasting too much time. So if you've got like an hour long chat with somebody, it's going to take you 6 or 7 hours just to edit it. So
Amazing.
as long as I'm in the ballpark with that, I'm more than happy. But right now, it's I say it doesn't feel like work. It's
Good.
my days go really fast.
I'll bet. Well, you know what? I mean, they say, right? If you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And
Yeah.
you talked about the Comic Cons too and the stuff that you sell. So we haven't even talked arcade frames. How did you get started with that?
Somebody brought me a frame for Christmas one year, which was effectively, I keep saying this, I'm nearly a 50-year-old man playing with Lego, which is ridiculous in itself. I also open a video shop and I play with Lego. That's what I do. But yeah, somebody brought me a frame. The nearest one I've got on display is that
Oh,
one there. So
nice.
that's a Lost Boys one, which I made for Billy Worth, who
Oh,
played
what?
Dwayne in the Lost Boys, the cool guy with the long black hair who
Yeah.
never death by stereo. He was at a Comic Con one year, and I went up and gave him that as a gift. I gave him his own one,
Yeah.
and then I got one signed for him. So effectively, what it is, it's taking my love of pop culture, putting it into a Lego minifigure format, and putting it in a frame with a pop culture background. And I've been selling them at Comic Cons. I've introduced my love of VHS into that as well now. So they incorporate a VHS tape with all the figures and stuff. So
Wow.
it's been
That's
going down. It's been going well, but it's with doing the video shop this past year. It's had to take a bit of a back step, but hopefully this year the conventions are coming back.
I think so. I've had handful of guests on my show as well that were horror con attendees from
Yeah.
Friday the 13th um, and I'm thinking that I'll have to introduce you. My good friend Missy has the Scarlet Abbey, which she's a booking agent for Comic Cons, mostly horror conventions,
Oh
and
wow.
I think when you do your travel and when you're selling there, are you going around the UK or are you actually traveling worldwide to get the conventions?
It's just UK. The
Okay.
UK is great for conventions. It's just
Okay.
really exploded in the past few years, and a lot of small ones, which are ideal for my size of stuff I want to sell. So
Sure.
I'm not attending the big London ones yet, which are huge. The footfall on those things are massive, but
I'm sure.
hopefully eventually I can do those. But there's so many cool little small ones, so many great little horror ones. So I just love them. I just love the vibe. I was going to them as a fan before and meeting all these people to get their autographs before it got too expensive.
Sure.
Uh, Even on my wall here, I've got, let me see if I get my, like some Nightmare on Elm Street ones
Oh,
signed by
yes.
the cast and stuff like that. So
Oh, boy, I'm gonna have to introduce. Do you happen to know Amanda Wiss? She was in Nightmare on Elm Street. She was
yeah,
also.
she's signed this one.
Oh, very good,
Yeah,
man.
Tina.
Have you had her on your show yet?
No, no.
She is a dear friend. She's been on my show. One of my favorite people. I was with her a month ago in Cancun,
Wow.
this event, and as a guest, I think you would have so much fun with her. She's
I'd love that.
brilliant, very bright light. And as far as guests go, how is there somebody on the list that you just think, oh, this would be the dream guest? Like, who would I get that it would be the perfect one?
Um, I've
That's
been pretty lucky. Yeah, I've been pretty lucky. When I started the podcast, like you mentioned earlier, my initial route was through people who I knew, through whether it be through bands, whether it be through the fanzine, which I used to do. So I knew I had maybe 20 people who I could get that back end of episodes ready to go. But I also had a wish list as well.
yeah,
Um, and I've managed to check quite a few of them off. I was like, dang, I'm doing it.
yeah, absolutely.
I got Dave Perner from Soul Asylum,
Oh,
who
sweet.
was a huge one for me.
Yeah,
So he was on the list from the beginning, and I'd been trying to get him from when I very first started the show. And it was always the case when I got a contact or a lead, and I'd message whether it be a PR guy or something like that, or someone who's doing a specific campaign for him, and they come back, oh, how many downloads have you got? How many listeners? How many streams? And straight away, I'm like, it's a non-starter with my
right.
figures at this point.
Yeah,
Uh, but luckily, I managed to get a chat with Alex Arkis from Everclear,
yeah. I heard that
who were,
one.
He was great.
He was
And they
great.
were coming over doing a double header with Soul Asylum. So I think
Oh,
because I got Art on, then I reached out to the Soul Asylum people as well. There's like, oh, well, if Art's done it, Dave will do
yeah,
it.
good thinking. And so you reached out to like their booking agents or their management.
I'm trying to think how it was. Initially, I was I was finding various PR contacts
Okay.
for Soul Asylum. I tried 2 or 3 different ones. I think it's whoever's doing a campaign for them at the time. They go through different people. But yeah, then I eventually got Art on board, who I'd been speaking to their manager for a while, which he was really cool. Their manager was. It was simply just through a link through the website for like press and stuff like that. Email this, and he got back to me. He says, "We'd love to do it, but not right now. Get back to us in
Yeah.
3 weeks. We've got an announcement." 3 weeks passed by. Oh, we're not quite ready. Get back to us in 3 weeks. So I kept emailing him back, and then next thing I knew, there were this UK tour,
Oh,
Soul
wow.
Asylum and Everclear. I was like, oh, that's the announcement.
Right.
So he was like, okay, let's do it. So got the interview with Art, and then from then, strangely, I went out on the Grand Theft Audio tour, and one of the bookers on that tour, he came on the bus with us for a couple of days, and he's like, "Oh, I'm doing this Soul Asylum Everclear tour." I'm like, "What? Can you get me in with Soul Asylum?"
Yeah.
And that was one of the ins for that, because I did the Alex Arkis interview, sent the link to my friend who I'd met, and he's like, "Oh, do you want to speak to Dave?" I'm like, "Damn right."
Yeah. Man, I mean, what a perfect conduit too, because you did the
Yeah.
work ahead of time. You know, some people expect that they feel entitled, like they should just be able to walk in and get that. The fact that you did the legwork and you were persistent and you're really professional at what you do, I think, you know, even if you don't have the millions of
Yeah.
streams and subscribers, they should see that the quality, you know, is good there and it's not
Hope
going to
so.
paint
Yeah.
them in a bad light. That's another thing. A lot of times guests are really worried that you might be in the tabloid sort of spectrum where you're
Mm.
going to try and paint them in a bad light. And
Want
that's,
that clickbait
yeah.
kind of
Oh, man.
that quote.
My oldest son said, "Dad, if you really want this thing to take off, you know, just hit all the hot buttons." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't want to
Yeah.
go." And you'll probably be like me. I try. I say, I don't have any rules. I try to avoid politics and religion. That's
Hmm.
it. We might not talk necessarily about COVID because everybody's kind of burned out on it, but you can talk about how it affected you,
Yeah.
and I really leave it open.
No, yeah, I never push for that clickbait. If it comes, I'll take it. If they want to go down that route, I'm more than happy for them to bare their soul or whatever. But they will figure it out if you're kind of if you're the guy who's kind of clawing for those quotes, they'll figure you out. They'll have you sus. So I don't want to be put in that awkward situation. I want to get some kind of rapport and relationship with a guest, at least for that 45 minutes.
Sure.
So yeah, I just want that free flowing conversation, and hopefully it comes across in a fun, upbeat way.
Every single episode I have listened to of yours has. Have there been any that you got to and you go back in editing and you think, you know what? This one's, and you don't have to name the names. But is there anything that you've never published that you just thought, oh, okay, that doesn't need to be out there?
Um, I don't know. I don't think so. I've maybe took a few little bits out, but you got me thinking now.
Yeah.
I think the only things I've ever gone back on is when the audio has been really bad. I've had
Right.
to get back to them and say, "Look, have you got like a spare half an hour just to do another section again? Because it's just not sounding great. Because it's tough with just audio podcasts. The amount of podcasts I've listened to where I've turned them off because the audio has not been
Yeah.
great. Because with visual stuff as well, like, such as this, you've got that distraction. You don't have to have such a flow.
Right.
People have got the visual thing as well to take away from the audio. So, but yeah, with it just being an audio podcast, I become really picky. So if it's not working for me, I'm like, oh, let's see if we can do a little bit again. But I don't know if I've had to censor anything so far.
That's yeah. So far, you know, there have been a couple that I took down just because there was some,
Wow.
there was, you know, just there was enough that kind of it wasn't just that it went against my own moral standards or anything like that, but there was some episodes that I had that I thought, wow, I would hope that they didn't intend for it to be so inflammatory, but I just didn't want it to be out there representing the, you know, the show. there have been some audio wise that I wish so badly I could go back. I did that interview with Tawny Katane. I
Yeah.
did her last interview before she
Yeah.
passed. And we tried so hard at the beginning of the episode to fix her audio because it was so quiet and muted. And, in post, I can fix some stuff. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, now that she's gone, there's not much I
Yeah.
can do even to do a redo. But I was going to ask you because that's one that stands out to me in particular. There have been few in my career with the episodes here. We've done like 266, I think. There are a handful that have changed my life that really were so powerful that I take them with me and they've affected me in a beautiful way. I
Yeah.
was going to ask you if there are any that stand out to you that really sort of formed who Rob became.
Um, you bared your soul pretty openly on our chat, mate. That was that was an honor to share that one to people, and I hope people enjoyed it. So for you to be so open on our chat was great. I had a friend on who goes under the name of Coffee Jesus,
Oh,
who
nice.
my friend Steve from who was in one of our first bands together, and we kind of lost touch over the years. Um, Strangely, because of I think it probably happens to a lot of people. I'm very active on Facebook and stuff
Yeah.
like that, and that's how you stay in touch with people these days. He wasn't on that. He was on Twitter occasionally, but for a long time, everything was Facebook. Well, it was MySpace, then it was Facebook. So we really drifted away. Our band had split up, not on the best of terms. So I think that hurt him a lot more than it did me back then. So yeah, we'd lost touch quite a bit, but then over the last few years, we'd reconnected again over music. Um, and he was doing a new project and he says, "Oh, can I come on the podcast?" So I'm like, "Yeah, of course I can." And for me, it was a chance to reconnect with somebody again. And he's had a tough few years and he was really bared his soul. Got quite emotional at parts of the podcast and stuff like that. And I was like, like I've said before, I just want a fun, upbeat conversation most of the time. So for me, it wasn't against anything he'd said. It was just me being conscious of how it was going to be perceived. And I put it out there, and the response was great. People, there's like, wow, that was such an amazing conversation. I can't believe how open he was and with his
Yeah.
feelings. And it was brilliant just to see the response. And especially from somebody who I have a lot of people are familiar with, some big names who people are, oh, how did you get this guest? Or can't believe you got this guest on the show. So to have somebody who people they had no idea who this guy was. So for them to take a chance on the podcast and listen to that episode and enjoy it and take something from it, that was a cool one. So to have my friend Steve or Coffee Jesus, you
Yeah.
can go back and listen to it. That was a special episode for because it was essentially our first conversation in quite a few years.
Wow.
So we was like touching on a lot of stuff on how we met and catching up within that hour-long episode. So that was a lot of fun.
You know, I talked about the labor of love, that we do with these kinds of
Mhm.
things. Those are the things you'll take with you. That
Yeah.
conversation you had with Steve. I have had a good handful of listeners too that have said, I had no idea what to expect going in to hear this certain person, this woman or this man that I'd never heard their name before, but hearing the conversation you had with them made me feel like I really knew them. Either I really liked and wanted to know them, or I felt like I really got a good sense of who they were beyond the contrived answers that people sometimes get from interviews. If somebody's on a press junket and they're out on tour and they're saying the same thing over and over again, they expect to walk into a conversation and just regurgitate, to 100 different people. So you're really good about getting out that personality in people. I think that's a fascinating thing. I
That's
can't wait.
interesting you bring that up with the press junket thing because I think you can sometimes tell the difference in the podcast styles. I find that a lot when, and it's a bit of a catch 22 in a way. Like I was saying earlier about it didn't happen in this specific chat, but like the Dave Perner one, I know I got that interview because they were promoting the tour. They
Yeah.
needed press for the tour. So I think that potentially could have just been him expecting to speak about the tour. Thankfully, it didn't go that way because he's a really cool guy and
Yeah.
he was happy to talk about anything. But there have been cases in the past where I'm going in and I know this person's probably done 3 or 4 interviews in that day, and they're just ready to speak about a certain thing. So that's sometimes one of the toughest things, to try and get them to move away from that and open up with some stuff which perhaps they hadn't talked about for a while. Because that's what I want to try and get from the podcast. It's more of a nostalgia podcast. So sometimes it's hard for me to bring it back to that. And right, I want you to go back to 1984 and tell me what poster you had on your wall. Right. That's what I want to hear about.
Right. Absolutely. Well, speaking of 1984, you've got the Van Halen 1984 album in the back. Is that autographed?
Yes.
You're kidding.
Michael Anthony.
Wow.
I never answered your question about who's on my list of people who I still want to get on the podcast. Michael Anthony would be a good one.
Okay, so people may not know, Rob's also a bass player. So he's right next to that. He's got his Fender bass hooked up, laying there against the cabinet near the 1984. And I have heard incredible interviews of Michael Anthony. I thought, the one he did once, oh man, when he lost his grandson, he did Eddie Trunk interview a year and a half ago. And you talk about somebody that bears a soul.
Yeah.
Michael Anthony is not only an incredible bass player, but he is the solid gold human being. You can tell when he does interviews, and I could totally picture you guys doing that together. Have you reached out? Have you tried to do any kind of connection?
I have no way of connecting with him. I don't know. He has his like Mad Anthony Cafe,
right?
Social
and the hot
media
sauce
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that just gets bombarded with random requests. Maybe I should just take a punt on it and just keep
doesn't hurt, man. I mean, right? It works in other ways, but I think if he had an opportunity to hear some of the conversations and that, your nostalgic memory when you talk about Todd Jensen, coming outside and talking to you in the cold when he's on a tour with Hardline, you said that's what made you switch to bass, right? You were a guitarist before that. Yeah. So you could just turn that around and talk about how Michael Anthony influenced you. So where was it in your sort of timeline for, evolving as a musician, where you discovered the magic of Michael Anthony?
I always say I was late to the Van Halen party, but I was happy to come in late because the bands I got into was that second wave of melodic hard rock right towards the late 80s, very early 90s. So it was the bands like your Warrant and Danger Danger and Trickster. They were the bands I fell in love with. They were because they were only a few years older than me, like especially Trickster. I was like, I want to be friends with those guys. They're super cool. But one of our big bands was Extreme, because that's right when they exploded.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's when I saw Hardline, because they were supporting Extreme. But when you get into music, you absorb everything. You're just a freaking sponge in your teens. You want to read everything. Everything is so important to you. So I was reading all these interviews with Nuno Bettencourt in Guitar World and all this, and it was constantly name checking Van Halen. I knew who Van Halen was. I knew the name. I knew Jump and Why Can't This Be Love, because they were the big singles in the UK. But other than that, I didn't really know anything about them. So I eventually, I think my first introduction was seeing David Lee Roth live, ironically with Todd Jensen on bass.
Right.
Because Warrant was supposed to support them. I went to see Warrant, but got into David Lee Roth through that. So that was a little doorway opening for Van Halen. And then I got For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. That was how late to the party I was.
Wow. No kidding. Oh my goodness. Wow.
But the bonus from that, I could go to the record store every week and buy a brand new Van Halen album.
Yeah, that is a bonus. So since you've done that and you went through all the catalog, do you have a favorite now?
Are we talking, do I have a favorite era or a favorite album?
Everybody always asks about the era. Everybody says Sammy or Dave, I mean, I'm fine if you want to answer that. That's
Well, my answer to that is I chop and change.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like full on Sammy Hagar stuff, and then other times I'm full on David Lee Roth stuff. But my favorite album is probably between For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. I have a soft spot for it for several reasons. It's the first album I got into. I think it was the band firing on all cylinders on a real comfortable plane. Mm-hmm. They were like in this really good frame, but Michael Anthony's bass sounds amazing on that album.
Yeah, nice.
So I love that. I always go back and watch that clip from the MTV Music Awards where they opened with Pound Cake.
That's right.
It's one of the greatest live
Yes.
performances ever.
Iconic.
So for unlawful carnal knowledge, I love, but I also love Women and Children First.
Oh yeah,
Is
nice.
is a go-to, which was for me was the hardest album to get into. It took me so many listens, then all of
Yeah.
a sudden it clicked, and I was like all in.
That start to finish, it's a great record, and that Women and Children First is oftentimes an answer for a lot of people. Those songs
Yeah,
speak to them. Fair Warning to me was the game changer. That was the first I ever heard any Van Halen actually, and it changed my everything about like what I wanted to do for a career. But
yeah.
going back to some of the you just totally brought up something that I completely forgot about. I'm gonna tell you a Trickster story. I
Bring it up.
was I was on tour with a cover band, doing 5 nights a week. A lot of times, so I would live in Montana, but we'd go on this tour where we'd play in the Northwest, like Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Oregon, like a 5-state sort of radius, kind of like a UK tour.
Yeah.
But we would play, what you would kind of consider a residency. We'd play at least 5 nights in the same city and same club. So you'd have a band house, and everybody would stay, fairly close to the venue. Well, this one particular place in Idaho, we had a 2-week stint where we were going to support Trickster on 2 shows that they were going to do in Idaho Falls, Idaho. Middle of nowhere. The band was just taking off. I think it was 91, I believe, or 90. Yeah, probably 91. The venue we played was a bar, and every guy in the band was underage, except it was the 21st birthday for one of the guys in the band. I don't even remember who it was. They had their tour bus, and we were staying, and they were sleeping on the bus outside the venue. And we had this really awful, like old automotive garage converted into a band house. And one of the guys in the band, and I think it might have been PJ, came off the bus and said, "Hey man, come in and buy some beers with me for the guys in the band, because like I'm the only one, but I need help carry it." And so we went back, and they were telling me the story, about how they signed and they broke, and I think they were from New Jersey or somewhere around the East Coast of the U.S. and
Paramus, New Jersey, I think.
Paramus, New Jersey. Okay, yeah. So and I was frustrated because uh, they were all so damn good looking. Every
Yeah.
woman in the venues. We were playing this club for a week ahead of time. Trickster shows up, and all the ladies stopped paying attention to us. Right? They all just wanted to talk to, PJ and Steve, and but I I remember just feeling envy, at that point, but thinking, okay, if they're playing these tiny little clubs in Idaho, there's a shot for me. And I love the fact that they've all gone on, they still continue to do these shows. I love seeing PJ going out and doing all these other projects too. It's really been fun to
I
watch.
saw him in Nottingham a few months ago with Fozzy.
Oh yeah, he was on
Unreal.
the Fonzie show. How was it?
I'm like, it was great. I'm like, there's PJ Farley from Trickster
Yeah,
in Nottingham Rock City on the main stage.
did you have him on your show?
I've spoke to PJ a while ago. Yeah, that was my initial connection with him. So when he came to Nottingham, he hooked us up with guest lists and stuff like that. I was
Nice.
like, this is great.
That is, man, I would think it is, just like you. I mean, such a fan of that era, and
Yeah.
being a musician that gets to go out and do this stuff, but then also being able to appreciate that as if we were teenagers still.
Yeah.
It's a gift. I'm thinking, what's next for Straight to Video podcast? Do you have a list of guests that you've got coming out that you're going to share?
I've just started. I've decided like doing this for like 2.5 years. Last year I took like a 3-week break over Christmas last year, so I've done the same thing again this year, which has been good. I think it's been tough to kind of motivate myself back in, but yeah, I've got a few podcasts. I'm relaunching the podcast next week on Friday the 13th.
Oh, good.
Hopefully that's a good omen, not a bad one. But I spoke to a guy called Dominic Brunt, who's a huge soap star over here. We have a TV show over here called Emmerdale, which has been going for longer than probably you and I have been alive.
Wow.
It's well, probably not that long. It's probably been going about
Yeah, maybe longer than you.
35 years.
I'm
Well, we're
old.
similar ages. But he's been on that show since the late 90s, but he's also a huge horror fan and a horror filmmaker as well. And he's just got a new film out called Wolf Manor. So I spoke to him today. So he's going to be on next Friday's show. So I've just got to get into the process now of reaching out to people who I spoke to before Christmas, and say, can we nail down a time to do this interview? So, and also Ted Pole is coming over from Danger in a few months. So I got to try and wrestle him onto the show at some point.
Yeah, man. Do you ever show up at the gigs there and say, "Hey, by the way, I've got a podcast. I'd love to have you on my show," and kind of try and corner somebody while you're at a gig?
Um, I've not done it. So that's what I used to do with the magazine
Yeah,
all the time. It was great, and it was great because I could take a copy of the magazine as well to show people, which was always a bonus. But as you know, gigs have been pretty sparse over the last couple of years. I mean, I've been to a few shows over the last 12 months, but not really many opportunities to speak to people either before or after a show and pitch the podcast that way. It's always been through email or through word of mouth or through recommendations. So
yeah,
hopefully, eventually, I can get somebody on the show that way.
nice. Yeah, well, I think yeah, Michael Anthony, that's got to be the one. We're gonna all right. So let's put our collective minds together and make sure you
Put it
manifest.
out there.
Yeah, 2023, Michael Anthony. And when it happens, then you can just say, we talked about this being a bucket list, right, for the last year or so. I would love to see it happen, man. Rob, I'm going to be seeing you in a few months. I'm going to come over.
It's
I'm
happening.
getting my back in shape, man. There's no way I will leave you hanging. And when I do, I would love to bring my little portable podcast kit and let's have a little follow up on this thing and find
Let's
out
do that, man.
how the progress has been with arcade frames and the straight to video.
You can come to the shop and
Oh,
we'll do it in the shop.
I would love that, man. Absolutely. Well, I saw that you have Street Fighter. What other video games do you have in there?
We just got a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game
Oh,
in there at the moment.
awesome.
But,
Okay.
but we've also got a screening room where we've got access to like stream any game you want onto a big screen. So
Nice. You use the MAME ROMs. Is that what you're doing for?
yeah, just get it on there and just
That's
any
cool.
game you want. So put your requests in and we'll
Okay.
get it all logged in there for you.
You know what, buddy? I was like Galaga was the game of late for a long time, and that was like I could play for hours. A gal that I dated for several years, she also was a Galaga person, and we shut down. We went to go see Miles Kennedy play up in Seattle, and we went to the show. Show got over at 11. We went next door to this little pizza slash pinball hall, and they had a Galaga game in there. She knows that it was my game, and she talked a bunch of smack. So we started playing. My I was dead. My guys were all gone within a half hour. She continued to play. The venues closed at 2 a.m. They were still sweeping and they closed the shop and left it open. So she got like an all-time Hall of Fame, like high score. And I've never played since. I can't do it, man. It's not because I was beat by a girl. It was my ex-girlfriend who just talked so much smack. She got farther than she ever thought she could. And it was like almost universally like blessed to shut me out of Galaga
Yeah.
now. So I can't do that. Defender was my game of choice in the early
Yeah.
days. How about you?
The Spy Hunter was
Oh
mine.
yes, man! I can still hear the theme song.
Yeah.
And then the oil slicks and the smoke. Yeah,
That was my game.
Okay, all right, man. Well, you'll smoke me at that one, but I look forward to video games, and we're gonna go back down the memory lane of '80s movies.
Anytime, man.
I really do look forward to seeing you get Michael Anthony on the show. I think it'd be amazing. Straight to Video podcast, the Straight to Video '80s store, the museum. You got arcade frames, and lots of nostalgia. I recommend that people go out, hit stvpod.com, and find the magic of Rob Lane. I'm really grateful to I've got to know you the last couple years, buddy.
It's been awesome, man. Oh, I think it's all thanks to Johnny Monaco. That's what it all is.
Is that how you found me? Is that how this connection
Maybe.
happened? Oh.
I think it might have been, yeah.
Oh my goodness, bless Johnny Monaco, right, man? So were you high fiving me right there? Is that what we were doing? Boom, awesome. All right, man. Well, here's to Johnny Monaco. Let's hope that Stephen Piercy gets out there to the UK so you can come and watch him do that.
That'd be awesome.
It's pretty cool. He's nailing it, man. So Johnny, if you're watching this, we're singing your praises, even though you're absolutely crazy. I love you. Rob Lane, thanks again, my friend. Happy New Year to you.
Kevin, Happy New Year, mate. Thank you ever so much.